So I'm very pleased to be here today and to talk to you on this topic of the Abraham Accords. So many of you might be asking, what is the importance of the Abraham Accords and how is it relevant to, in relation to the topic of the previous Scholars Circle, Hamas, right? So one of the ways in which this question of the Abraham Accords intersects with the current Hamas-Israel war is that many commentators at the beginning of the war mentioned that the timing of Hamas's attack was most certainly related to what were perceived as the beginning of talks for Saudi-Israeli normalization. So this brings us to the topic of the Abraham Accords. So in continuation, meaning Saudi-Israeli normalization as a continuation of the Abraham Accords, which were first signed in 2020. So if this is the case, then this must be something serious, that such an attack, though prepared for a significant period of time, was launched within this timing. So the Abraham Accords seem to have an importance in relation to October 6th, but they point to another important question in relation to the current conflict is its regional dimension, right? I mean, many people in the United States, in the West, think of it as an Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it is. There are aspects that are between Israel and Palestinians, whether it be in the West Bank or in Gaza, but it's actually also always been a regional conflict, meaning that Israel, has always fought in its different wars, not only the Palestinians, but regional states and actors. And today, Israel has regional foes in the Middle East and North Africa. And so the Abraham Accords seem to be the beginning, potentially, and we'll discuss this over the course of this lecture, of Israel having regional allies, or certainly people with whom have potential allies. So let's just first go over, so that's the context. We're going to discuss the regional context of the current war, and the Abraham Accords plays an important role in that. So today's lecture, what I'm going to do is first talk about what exactly are the Abraham Accords, and then give the sort of immediate proximate background, so the immediate factors that happen in the time frame leading up to the Accords, and then give a larger background explaining the geopolitical alliances and enmities and conflicts that have made the Abraham Accords possible. And then at the end of the lecture, we'll discuss a little bit the potential of the Abraham Accords for being a vehicle really of peace and prosperity in the Middle East and the pitfalls to the Abraham Accords. So that's going to be the course of the lecture. So the first thing is, what are the Abraham Accords? So in 2020, the United Arab Emirates in the summer and early fall, the United Arab Emirates, followed by Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, though Sudan has not completed the process, signed a normalization agreement with Israel. So what does normalization mean? It means that they have full diplomatic relations, so an exchange of embassies. They have full diplomatic ties. They have recognition of each other as states, and they are free to exchange in any form of whether it's economic exchange, trade. That means no boycott, no economic boycott, and pursue even exchange and mutual cooperation in areas as sensitive as the military, right? But also technology and things like this. So the Abraham Accords are actually somewhat, I would think, a little bit more than the current agreements that Israel has with the two other states that it currently has peace with in the region. So Israel, in the region of North Africa and the Middle East, Israel has peace with Egypt and Jordan, right, which it signed the peace agreement with Egypt in the late 70s and Jordan in 1994. And they have normal ties, though the ties are somewhat cold. It's a cold peace. And then with the Abraham Accords, it has this normalization with the United Arab Emirates, with Bahrain, with Morocco, and with Sudan, which is ongoing. If we could show the image A, Simon, could you do that? And it'll give us, if we can't see that image, then we'll go straight to the text of the Abraham Accords. The other important things, so that's on the political level. The other important thing is the text of the Abraham Accords and their name, because these give us some indications on the nature of what these Abraham Accords are about. So if I'm going to read from you a little bit now the text of the Abraham Accords. We, the undersigned, recognize the importance of maintaining and strengthening peace in the Middle East and around the world based on mutual understanding and coexistence, as well as respect for human dignity, freedom, including religious freedom. We encourage efforts to promote interfaith and intercultural dialogue to advance a culture of peace among the three Abrahamic religions and all humanity. So this is the first point I want to comment on, the insistence on using the three Abrahamic religions, because this point suggests the possibility of a cultural opening, that the three religions would recognize each other as equals. Now, this is not, as I will get into, this is not the typical Islamic theology in relation to Judaism or to Christianity. So already it offers a kind of, in addition to the formal diplomatic relations and cultural and economic, it offers a kind of, shall we say, ideological shift or potential for an ideological shift here. So this is the first one, in the mutual recognition of these three religions and then being placed on the same level. And then the next set of sentences, we believe that the best way to address challenges is through cooperation and dialogue, and that developing friendly relations among states advances the interests of lasting peace in the Middle East and around the world. Then it speaks a little bit more about dignity, hope, and faith. And then the next line is very important. It says, we support science, art, medicine, and commerce to inspire humankind. Now, this is very critical because it means that these are full relations with full kind of economic participation and a lot of trade. Now, Israel has been for much of its history boycotted by countries in the region. And then this is an extremely important sentence that was signed, and it says, we seek to end radicalization and conflict to provide all children a better future. So this mention of radicalization, which is a kind of general and vague term, is an oblique reference to the Islamist parties in the region who as I will discuss in this talk, are in fact are shared enemies between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Bahrain, and Sudan. So then it ends, we pursue a vision of peace, security, and prosperity, and then it ends with an interesting paragraph where it talks about, in this spirit, we warmly welcome and are encouraged by the progress already made in establishing diplomatic relations between Israel and its neighbors. And we encourage the ongoing efforts to consolidate and expand such friendly relations. So as we can see, this is a very interesting text, which suggests, in addition to kind of normal cultural and economic interaction, a change in ideology, right? A change, meaning potential change in a greater recognition of religions, and also a mention of extremism. This brings us now to the proximate causes of the Abraham Accords. So there have been, I'm going to give you, if you could just share quickly document A, and you can see the map of the different countries that have signed the Abraham Accords. Okay, so this map is very important. If you can see it clearly, is that all of the countries in North Africa and Middle East that are not in color here are countries that do not have diplomatic relations and do not have normalized relations with Israel. So that means that really this is quite a shift and quite a difference. Okay, if you could go back, if you could share now the first map, number 1. So in the proximate causes, I'd like to, the Trump administration developed this peace, the deal of the century that he called it, and various aspects went into the deal of the century. And among them, so there are different interpretations, but the Abraham Accords came up as something that had been discussed in the context of the United States strengthening its relations with Iran, against Iran, strengthening its relations with its allies against Iran, including the Gulf countries. And therefore, and also creating this deal of the century. And in a series of, I mean, I won't get into the details, but in a series of negotiations, the Abraham Accords were favored, and thus began the first signings between the United Arab Emirates and the United States, and Israel under the aegis of the United States. So that's the proximate cause. But what are the long-term causes that got us to this point? And the first map I'm going to share with you, it's very important here, is a map of the world countries that are Muslim. Okay, so there's, as you can see, it's a significant cross-section of the world of countries that are Muslim. And most of these, I'm going to show you another map, but most of the countries, Muslim countries that belong to the UN, when when the partition agreement between Israel and the Palestinians was voted in 1947, most of the Muslim countries voted no, okay, or abstained, or countries that had a large Muslim population abstained. So why is this important, and why am I showing you this map of the Muslim countries? Because we need to first understand a basic point of theology, of Islamic theology, that was alluded to in the Abraham Accords document, okay? The Muslims, like the Christians, have a relationship to Judaism, but it's really best, and at worst, it's highly negative. And that relationship sees Islam as having superseded and replaced and improved upon Judaism, just as Christianity viewed the same thing. So a priori, any Muslim country doesn't recognize Israel, or won't recognize Israel, doesn't see any value in the Jews returning to their homeland, and in fact, doesn't necessarily recognize a relationship between the historical Jewish people and the land of Israel. And so, unsurprisingly, the countries that belong to the UN during this period did not vote for the partition. But the other reason I'm showing you this map of the Muslim world is to show that on the one hand, we have this commonality of Islam and this ambivalent relationship to Judaism. On the other hand, the Islamic world is actually quite diverse. And this is going to play into, as we will see, the factors that lead us up to the Abraham Accords and lead us up to a potential peace in the Middle East. That just like the Christian world has many different ethnic groups and has different Christian streams and has different sort of political parties, so too with the Islamic world. And so I'm just gonna, if you look into the middle, this map gives you the Muslim distribution of Sunni and Shi'i, right, which is one major theological difference. We could make a parallel, it's not an exact one, but it's kind of like the Catholic versus Protestant. They're both Christian, or Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant. They're both Muslim, but they have quite, in many cases, or have often had an antagonistic relationship to each other. Then there's another, if you could show, there's another important distinction, is that when Islam, which started in Saudi Arabia, moved across North Africa, so across Egypt, Libya, and Algeria, and then moved up into the Levant, where it's today Iraq and Syria, that it created an Arab caliphate. And in that movement, a lot of Arabic became the language of instruction and the language of administration in the area. And it also brought Arab-speaking settlers to that area. So those countries, Egypt, that are today, Egypt, Libya, and Algeria, Morocco, and then going into Iraq and Syria, these are countries that are not, the indigenous population is not Arabic, but Arabic has become an important language and an important area. And they, in the modern period, have formed the Arab League. This is not true of Iran. This is not true of Turkey. This is not true of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, areas which became Muslim later, and where the language was not replaced by Arabic, and where there weren't significant enough Arabic speaking or ethnic Arab populations to make this part of the Arab world. And the same thing goes for sub-Saharan Africa, as you see Mali, Nigeria, Chad. And the same thing goes if you look at the bottom right-hand end of the screen of Indonesia. So those are some of the ethnic differences. So the Islamic world has these Arabs, and the populations that pre-existed the Arabs still exist, right? The Amazigh in North Africa, the Egyptian Copts, right, who are the ancient Egyptians who are Christian, the Assyrians in Syria, then there are Kurds around Iraq. Those other populations, the Maronite Christians, and those other populations continued to exist, but they were ruled by a Muslim and Arabic-speaking group. This will be important because it's important to the politics which lead up to our talk. So if you could go now to map number 3 in terms of the history, we have, I would like this shows us that, or actually image number 4. So those are the distinctions in the Islamic world. And another important aspect to understand. So we have ethnic distinctions, we have language distinctions, we have 2 different religious groups, right? And we have the heartland of where Islam was created, which is in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. And all of those distinctions, which were created over time of the period from Islam's spread, continue to have relevance today. So this map here is an important map. It's the map of the Ottoman Empire, because this is really where our story starts with the Abraham Accords. I've given you the background of this Muslim world. And by the modern period, there are really 2 big Islamic empires. The Arab Caliphate had been replaced by the Ottoman Empire. There were 2 empires just before that, but they weren't very long lasting. And the Ottoman Empire lasted a long time. You can see from it starts in the 1300s and it spreads across North Africa and the Middle East. And it's in existence until World War I. If you can go now to the next map numerically, map number 5, you'll see the other important Islamic empire in the modern period is the Persian Safavid Empire. Now, these 2 empires are important because the European empires, here we see in the Persian Safavids, they control up into the Caucasus, and so which borders around with Russia, and they control into this is very important to understand these empires, because in this age, in the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century, the world is in a contest of empires. And these 2 Muslim, if we think back to the previous map of the Muslim world, right, which is all of North Africa, the Middle East, and Iran, by the time we get to the modern period, the 2 empires that are holding up are the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire, and they're losing to the big European imperial powers. So Europe moves in and ends up, either through business ties or through direct colonization, ends up taking parts of Ottoman territory, weakening the Safavid Empire. The Russians take all of the Caucasus. The French come into North Africa, the Italians come into North Africa, the British come into North Africa, and so we have European influence and impact. And this has 2 very significant impacts on the politics of North Africa and the Middle East, which will also impact our conflict. The 2 important things that it does is, on the one hand, there are some groups in the area and some peoples in the area who are interested and, in fact, influenced by European ideas, by secularism, by democracy, by nationalism. And there are other groups in North Africa and the Middle East that reject these ideas completely. And so the first group is represented by some of the Arab nationalist or other nationalist groups, the Democrats of those groups, whether they're Arab nationalists or Kurdish nationalists in the region, or in the case of Jews, the Zionists, right? And others, and then within the Muslim populations, you have groups that become what will become Islamist. They are, and the most important Islamist group is the Muslim Brotherhood, which is created in the 1920s by a thinker called Hassan al-Banna, and he, along with other people like Saad Qutb, they describe an ideology of which seeks to bring back the caliphate, but unlike the traditional caliphate, it's revolutionary, it's anti-European, and it's a very direct call for jihad. So among the different political groupings that come into being in this fulcrum of what is the modern period, with European empires expanding, the Ottoman Empire fracturing, the Persian Empire also losing its power, is you have Islamism is one of the political movements that arises. Another political movement is Arab nationalism, because the Arabs are one of the groups within the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish nationalism, the nationalism of the different peoples in the lands of the Ottoman Empire, of which Zionism is one group, but also Assyrian nationalism. And then you have the influence of the political ideologies of the West. So that includes communism, that includes democracy or liberalism. And so those are the movements that influence the Middle East and North Africa in this period. So this gets us to, importantly, to the period of, now we see the context of the Zionist movement, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and the different national movements. After World War I, the European powers decide the future of the borders of the region. And if we could now move to map, or rather image 6, the European powers decide how North Africa and the Middle East, how its borders will be divided up. And so we can see this is a map of the world. And so here you see how the different European empires are controlling so much of the world by 1914. And they, by 1919, so in gray here, you have what's part of the Ottoman Empire. They decide they're not, though they play during the war with the different national movements, including Zionism or including the Kurdish national movement. At the end of the day, they decide they give Turkey a significant portion, and Turkey becomes its own state. And then with the Middle East and North Africa, they create mandates, and they divide up the territories. And so they divide up territories that are multinational and multi-ethnic, and also have these different political strands, right? Have some secular Arab nationalists, have some traditionalists, have some Muslim, some people who will then become the Muslim Brotherhood. So I'd like to, if we can look at, just for a second, if we could look at the modern Middle East map, I would like to show that to you. So the modern Middle East will give us, if you can see it here, this is really our area. So among the different political options that arises after World War I, and then even more so after World War II, are really 3 important ones. And this is particularly after World War II, which becomes relevant for our story in the creation of the State of Israel. We have traditionalist states, which are states that are led by either a group, an emir, or a king, like Saudi Arabia, or like what will become the United Arab Emirates, so in the Gulf, or in Morocco, which is led by a king, where traditional social and political structures are stronger, and they're considered authoritarian, they're considered not so modern, but they are one of the political options in the area. And then the other political option that is a very well-known, maybe to some of you, is the kind of Arab nationalists and Arab socialists. So if you could show the image of the Arab League. So the Arab League, there you have most of the countries in North Africa and the Middle East, right, going from Egypt, Libya, Algeria, well, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, and Algeria here. So we go Egypt and Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco. These are all Arab League countries, but some of them are these traditionalist countries, which I've spoken about. And some of them are socialist, but they're called the Arab League because the Arabs, the Arab nationalists within this area, decide they take sort of the stronger power within these states. And if you remember from the beginning of the lecture, I spoke about this, that these are all multinational and multi-ethnic areas, but areas that had a strong influence of the Arab language and Arab settlers through the caliphates. And so the Arab League united under Arab nationalism countries that were kind of different politically, and they were even on different sides of the Cold War. So Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and other Other Gulf countries were on the American side during the Cold War because they felt that the Soviets were godless, whereas the more secular, more left-wing Arab nationalist states under Egypt or Libya or Algeria were on the Soviet side or were non-aligned in the Cold War. But the Arab League was united in fighting against Israel. So if we go back to our thinking about the Muslim world, so when we look at the partition vote, no Muslim country voted for partition. However, when we get to the wars, the 1948 war, it's only the Arab League countries that are fighting against Israel in 1948. Turkey, which is aligned with the United States, and Iran, which is aligned with the United States in the Cold War, has not joined the Arab League in fighting for the liberation of Palestine, right? So already we have two Muslim countries. Well, Turkey is at that time officially secular, but has a Muslim majority that are not, and that have relations with Israel. They have full diplomatic relations with Israel, really from the late 1940s onward. But the Arab League countries, and particularly the socialist ones, are very virulently against Israel and fight these wars again in 1967 and in 1973, except that they lose. And this is where the story begins with the Abraham Accords. And we have about 5 or 6 minutes, but it's important to get to this. So they lose these wars, and then something new happens, which is that these Arab socialist states of the Arab League, Egypt, Algeria, Libya, they had managed to suppress the Muslim Brotherhood. Many of the writers, the main intellectuals of the Muslim Brotherhood, were put in jail by these Arab socialist countries. But in 1979, something changes the political landscape. Up until 1979, we have traditional states like the Saudi Arabia, we have, and then we have the secular Arab nationalists, and then we have Iran and Turkey, which are aligned with the United States, and which are sort of, Turkey is a kind of its own thing. It's secular, but it's distanced from it's on the side of the Americans, and Iran is on the side of the Americans, and it's somewhat traditionalist, but it's westernizing. 1979, political Islamism, the Muslim Brotherhood's Islamism, comes into power for the first time. So now our political map has changed. We have the traditionalist countries of the Gulf and Morocco. Then we still have the Arab socialist countries, which have fought but have lost against Israel. And then we have an Islamist country, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now this gets us to a very important point and something that happens that's very drastic and different. Up until Iran comes, the Islamic Revolution happens in Iran, Saudi Arabia and the Arab socialist countries have a kind of modus vivendi. They are part of the Arab League, and though they're on the different sides of the Cold War, and though they're different politically, they have little squabbles. They're not really in open war with each other, and they're united by this Arab nationalism. The Saudis are, however, much more threatened by the Iranians, because the Iranians, as Islamists, not only want to get rid of all Western influence, but they also want to get rid of any kind of royal power. They're revolutionary, so they're anti-establishment, and so the Saudis become very, very concerned with the power of Iran. And so from very early on begins what will be called the Saudi-Iranian proxy conflict. And what is a proxy conflict? A proxy conflict is when two countries are in a state of tension, but they're not in a state of open warfare with each other. Rather, the wars are fought around them. So if you could show the number 11, the Saudi Arabia, or actually number 10, the Saudi Arabian proxy conflict. That's the image. And there you will see that the proxy conflict, now the proxy conflict brings into a few things that we talked about at the beginning of the lecture. One of them has to do with Sunni and Shia minorities. So this area, the eastern part of Saudi Arabia, and where you see Bahrain, it's where so Saudi Arabia and Iran face each other. They share a body of water, right, which the Iranians call the Persian Gulf and the Saudis call the Arab Gulf. And most of the Saudi oil fields are on the eastern side of Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia felt very vulnerable, not only in that Iran would sponsor Islamists within the kingdom to overthrow the monarchy, but also that Iran would try and capture the oil fields of the area. Also, the United Arab Emirates and are also close to Iran and also felt. And so the Gulf, a few things happened. So in this Saudi-Iranian proxy conflict, the Saudis start consolidating their relationships, and you have the Gulf Cooperation Council, right? And then you have the Saudis. Iraq, by the way, felt also very the Arab nationalist secular countries felt very threatened by Iran, and so Iraq and Iran start a war very soon in the early 80s, and the Saudis side on the Iraqi side, and they give them a lot of weapons and a lot of money. And so that's one of the first arenas of the Saudi-Iranian proxy conflict. The Saudi-Iranian proxy conflict gets even larger with the Arab Spring, and this will really bring us into the Abraham Accords. So before the Arab Spring, so now we know we have this new player with state power, an army, a large population. Iran is a large country and a significant power, and has a lot of fossil fuels, a lot of oil. So Islamism has finally grabbed the reins of an important country, and that has really changed the balance of power in the region. The next major thing that happens that's significant for the balance of power in the region and the interests of the different players, I'm not talking about Israel now, is Turkey. Turkey was a secularist country. And then in the early 2000s with Erdogan, who is still in power now, it slowly becomes an openly Muslim Brotherhood country. So this Muslim Brotherhood, which had been suppressed by the secular Arab states of the Arab League, and which the Saudis and the conservative monarchies didn't like either, right? Now has another state, this time not a Shia, but a Sunni state that represents it. And then another important development happens around this time, maybe a little bit earlier, in fact, is that Qatar, which was originally kind of a conservative monarchy, and this you can see the red is Qatar, and there's also Bahrain. Qatar, the emir of Qatar, the current emir's father, becomes influenced by the Muslim Brotherhood. And it can be said now that Qatar is an openly Muslim Brotherhood state, it identifies with the Muslim Brotherhood ideology, and it is a very wealthy state that funds a lot of Muslim Brotherhood powers in the region. Now, this gets us to the final piece of the puzzle for the Abraham Accords, and the geopolitical context for them is the Arab Spring. Now, many of you probably remember, unless you're a young student, in which case you would have been 10 or 11, but many of you who are already 30 and above will remember the Arab Spring. Now, the Arab Spring, we have here a map of an image of the Arab Spring, map for Arab Spring. If you can see that it's not numbered, what it was is that many of the old Arab socialist states, like Egypt, Egypt in the interim, we won't get into details, but Egypt switched sides to becoming American, mainly because they didn't have enough money, and that's sort of its own story. But many of the other states, Libya, Iraq, etc., there was discontent with them. And there were difficulties with them. And so Tunisia, which also had a socialist, secular Arab nationalist government, Tunisia is where the Arab Spring started in 2011. And what happens is that Qatar and its propaganda arm, its soft power arm, Al Jazeera, starts weakening the governments of the region, right? And through the Arab Spring. And the American government at the time, the Obama administration, was open to Muslim Brotherhood governments. And in fact, so the best example of that was Egypt. So they had the mass demonstrations, and then Mubarak resigned, and Morsi came to power, and Morsi was a Muslim Brotherhood. He was elected, and he was a Muslim Brotherhood member. So what happened in the Arab Spring is that it turns out that the alternative to many of these Arab socialist dictators like Gaddafi, etc., was the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Saudis very quickly, about a year into Morsi's reign, helped the coup to bring a non-Muslim Brotherhood leader back into power in Egypt. And Egypt is very close to Saudi Arabia. So all of this long story is to explain that both Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood in Qatar, in Turkey, and the various movements in North Africa and the Middle East are viewed by the Saudis as a very, very serious threat to their internal political stability, and also to the stability of the region. And Israel, right, shares the same enmity as, and so the Saudis have not yet signed, but the United Arab Emirates, who is a conservative monarchy, which is anti-Muslim Brotherhood. And that, again, if we think back to the declaration of the Abraham Accords, it made that mention of radicalization, which is a reference to the Muslim Brotherhood and such organizations and Islamist organizations. So now we begin to understand that in this much less stable environment of post-Arab Spring, with the Iranians hoping to get, not only being strong militarily, but now vying for nuclear power, with the Turks, which are another strong economy and very populated state in the region, run by a Muslim Brotherhood leader, that we have a situation where these countries are finally open and concerned enough to normalize their relations with Israel. And there's a precedent for this. Egypt and Jordan signed peace agreements with Israel, Egypt in the late 70s and Jordan in the 1990s. So that is the situation that we have. That is the difficult situation. But there's one more piece of it. That's the kind of, if you will, security and economic situation. The Gulf countries and Morocco feel vulnerable internally by radicalism and Islamism, and so they want to develop their economies. They want more trade. They want technology from Israel. So they have many of their own internal political and security reasons for being open to normalization, and they want to be, during the Trump administration, this was very clearly aligned in the bloc against Iran. It's unclear. In the Obama administration was trying to be more conciliatory to Iran and come up with a negotiated deal, unlike the Trump administration, which was much more head-on against Iran. And during the Trump administration, the Saudis even tried actually to get rid of the Qatari, to get the Qataris basically to buckle under and expel the Muslim Brotherhood and to kind of fall into line with the Saudi perspective. Okay, so let's, if we would like to go to questions, before I do, I want to make one last mention was to the ideological dimensions that we read in the Abraham Accords Declaration. So the Saudis, unlike the Islamists, so the Islamists, whether in Iran or it's in the Palestinian Society, Hamas, the Islamists are extreme in their rejection of the Jewish state and any Western culture, any foreign cultures, anything that is not Islamic in the area. And so that's why Islamists are very dangerous for Israel and also very dangerous for other groups. We saw with ISIS how the Islamists went after any non-Muslims in the region. And ideologically, however, the Gulf states, the conservative monarchies of the Gulf states, are more open to taking those aspects of Islam that could come to some kind of accommodation with Judaism and with other Abrahamic faiths. And one of the kind of core ideas, and it's not something that's widely communicated, but it exists, is that there is a discussion already in the Hadith. The Hadith are one of the sacred texts of the Muslim. They're the sayings of the Prophet, that Al-Aqsa isn't even in Jerusalem, that Al-Aqsa, in fact, is in Saudi Arabia. So there are various undercurrents in the theology of Muslim clerics in the Gulf states, in the conservative monarchies in Morocco, that are more open theologically to the idea of the Jews having their own state, or to other religious groups in the region. And so I think that is reflected in the Abraham Accords. So all of this, so we have Israel having common enemies with the signatories of the Abraham Accords. We have an interest in economic cooperation, and we have this potential of a greater understanding through tradition that makes the Abraham Accords something that many people in Israel feel are one of the directions for peace. So I want to open up to any questions now.
Yes, so first of all, I'd like to thank you for your really enlightening lecture. I'd like to encourage everybody to put your questions in the Q&A box, and I will direct them to Olga. And I'm going to ask you our first question, which is, what do you think is the future of the Abraham Accords?
Right. So one of the things people have been looking at is the responses of Abraham Accord signatories to the current war. So other than Bahrain, none of the other signatories recalled their ambassadors. So this is an extremely important point, because if you recalling your ambassador is the first step towards removing normalization. So the fact that the other states have not recalled their ambassadors means that even if they're not aiding Israel, they're certainly not opposing Israel in their fight against Hamas. Bahrain is a bit of an exception. Bahrain has a very strong Shiite population, but it's ruled by an Arab princely family. And so there, the power, the rulers in Bahrain are much more vulnerable than in the other states. Next question.
Okay, the Arab Street in many countries are strongly pro-Palestinian in the war. How do you see that impacting on the Arab country leadership?
Right. So the Abraham Accords countries, what matters are the leaders, right? These are not democracies. These are authoritarian states, but they're conservative Muslim states. They're not authoritarian. And I mean, if you look at the way the Saudis are governed, every person can appeal to the Saudi king. They have mechanisms. They're different. They're traditionalist in how they run things, but they're not classically democratic in the way that we would see it in the West. And so for them, the street is not essential. What is essential is where the direction that the state wants to go in. And for the moment, they have enough power that they can maintain their stance. However, I think it explains why there hasn't been sort of open, congratulating Israel, or meaning that the Abraham Accord signatories won't recall their ambassadors, but they're not going to come out. The way in which they show some deference to the Arab street is by kind of taking a step back and letting Israel take out Hamas, but at the same time not overtly supporting the effort. And so I think that's where the influence comes in.
Here's the next question. Is normalism with Israel at all possible with the Saudi government, do you think?
Well, this is all the speculation, but the timing, the speculation was that normalization was getting quite close with the Saudis. And therefore, that's why one of the reasons why Hamas wanted to strike, because Saudi Arabia, and it speaks to the previous question about the Arab Street, Saudi Arabia can't do normalization when Israel's in a war with Hamas, right? So that's another way in which it has to show deference to the Arab Street. On the other hand, Saudi Arabia is very concerned, as is Israel, with the nuclear program of Iran. And so Saudi Arabia is trying different things. So the question is if it's at all possible. Many commentators think it is. However, a lot depends, and this goes to the future, the question of the future of the Abraham Accords. The reason the Abraham Accords are possible is that Israel is very strong militarily, and Israel is very strong in terms of its economy, and in terms of its technology. While the West is pressuring Israel to stop the war and to et cetera, in terms of the Abraham Accord signatories, and in terms of our actual allies, I don't know if allies is too strong a word, but the people we have peace with in the region, Israel actually has to show its strength, because that's one of the reasons that they're normalizing with us. If Israel shows that it's a lackey to the US, or it's not independent, or it is not able to show its strength where it's needed, then the Abraham Accords signatories are going to pursue the path of détente with Iran and with the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, they know that that path isn't without its dangers. So you can see that the Saudis are hedging their bets. On the one hand, they resume diplomatic ties with Iran. They've joined BRICS, right? They have, on the other hand, they, not for a minute do they trust the Iranians, or do they trust the Brotherhood? So I think that the Abraham Accords has a future, and I think most commentators believe it has a future. There's also a lot of money to be made, a lot of business, a lot of interests, but it's very important for that future for Israel to remain very, very strong. And that means standing up to forces in the West which have a different model of peace. And that actually leads me to one point. I'll take another question, but there's a very important point in terms of its impact on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that I want to address. Nina?
Well, so we actually only have one more question, and you can easily wrap up with that. And that is kind of related to what you've been saying anyway, which is, why did the Saudis join Russia and China on the economic deal?
Right.
So
So I think that the Saudis, I mean, if you look at Netanyahu's foreign policy, he was also, he, on the one hand, there's a special relationship with the US. On the other hand, he's not closing the door to India, to China, or anything else. I think that the United States is going through a shift in terms of what its global power is. And so the United States' historical allies are, are taking opportunities, or are testing out the waters, or creating alliances where they can. And so I think that's part of what's going on. But the last part of the puzzle that's very important is in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Right now, the Palestinians have two political parties. One of them is an Islamist party, Hamas, and the other one, the PA, is it's the remnant of the old Arab nationalist secularist parties. Both of those, so the Arab nationalist secularists are the ones that fought all the wars against Israel, 1948, 67, 73, et cetera, and 82 in the Lebanon War. And the Islamists, of course, can't stand Israel at all, right? Want to get rid of it, which we see with Hamas and with its absolutely horrific violence, even against babies and children, et cetera. The Abraham Accords has the potential of creating a third way, a political party that is more like the Saudis or more like the Emirates, rather, because they're actual signatories rather than the Saudis, who are kind of hovering around it and behind the lines, but creating a third way like the Arab Emirates, in terms of taking structures that exist within Palestinian society, that is to say, Palestinian society, in addition to political parties, has large local and family government structures, right? Can call it tribal or clan, and that have their own political mediation practices, their own political practices. And so one of the things that has been reported on recently is that the Gulf states would like Abbas to resign from the PA and would like to replace him with someone who thinks more along the lines, ideologically and politically, of the Gulf states, right? Which works with the local structures, and which is a conservative Muslim power, not an Islamist, and not part of the kind of secular Arab nationalist PA. And there are, there are local leaders within the West Bank or within Gaza. In fact, Gaza is divided up by clans and tribal groups, and Hamas organized its military according to that. So Hamas worked with these other structures. And so what has been floating around is that the Gulf countries are seeking to find a leadership that is more aligned with their viewpoint. So that's a way that it could have a significant impact on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in that it would offer a political leadership that was perhaps more sincere. I think many people doubt the sincerity of the PA and of in wanting peace, and certainly a better option than the Islamists. So to end this talk, I hope that shone a light on the different political streams within North Africa and the Middle East, and given you a sense of what Israel is dealing with locally and the potential of the Abraham Accords ideologically, economically, and politically to create a new and better Middle East, which we all hope for.
Thank you so much, Olga. This was really helpful in clarifying and making it much easier for us to understand what's going on. And I want to thank everyone who joined us for joining us at Scholars Circle, a Chai Mitzvah initiative.